Is this on? Okay, it was on. It was really quiet at first. Bear with me. We are carving belonging into the soul wood of these gathered tables. This wood that has been felled and sanded for the purpose of building a circle. From this table wood is a life that we carry, a light that we carry inside us, rooted here in the earth of our belonging as it nurtures our becoming. We are not a church built on foundation. We are a church growing wings. We are not a church home because home is not relatable when home is not safe or home is the streets. So we cast out language to make room for communion that looks more like pizza and less like exclusion. We stand here under stained glass, naming the colors instead of worshiping the image, because we can see more clearly now a world that's supposed to be kin, singing the ecosystem lullaby of relationship, the forested anthem of love. As we open glass doors, we reflect rainbows and inclusion. May our concrete ground make room for dandelions as we sit at these tables, as we share in these meals, as we hold the most tender pieces of one another, and may we call this church.
Hope is, and it can be a hope for our community, it can be a hope for this space, it can be a hope for friends, it can be a hope for ourselves, it can be a hope for growth or healing. But I'm gonna, whoa, hello. There we are. Thank you, Scott. Just one sentence, and we're just gonna kind of go around the room. If you don't feel comfortable, you can kind of tell the person next to you to go ahead, but I'm going to challenge you, one sentence from each of us to kind of be this communal meditation for us. So, Sharita, I'm going to start with you, and we'll go to Maddie and kind of work our way around the room, and I'll close us.
My hope is for this new season to bring new life and new.
How about you, Scott? My hope, kind of a word, a sentence of prayer, of hope, can be for our community, for our gathering, for yourself, for others. Okay, go. That's good. I love it. That's good. That's good. Paula.
benefits and blessings and find a way out back where they themselves.
That's beautiful. Tony. That's great. April. It's beautiful.
My hope is that blinders that we remove from all the people commit to that we see the purpose and
That's a good one. Okay. Chris. I love that. It's beautiful. Made it.
Myself to take that about my own, but for others to use that to continue to help them who are without others.
Beautiful. It's good. Vivian. I love that. We're glad you're here tonight. Beautiful. It's a good one. It's good. My hope for this season is courage for all of us, for growth for all of us, and growth takes courage. Growth is not always easy. I think it's something that we all long for and desire in some capacity, but we usually want it without the growing pains that often facilitate growth. And so my hope is that we are all courageous enough to endure the growing pains that need to come, so that we individually can be stretched, we as a community can be stretched, and we as a city can be stretched. And so I think bravery happens one person at a time, but I also think that bravery and courage is contagious. And I think when you start to operate with more courage, others around you start to operate with a little bit more courage, and it starts to stir up conversations, and it starts to bring about change with family and friends. And so my hope and my desire is for courage to rise up in all of us. So with that courageous spirit, we are going to dive back in to our series that we are rapidly finishing up. Can anyone believe we're getting to the end of 2023? Holy cow. So all this year, we've been looking at the red letters of Jesus. So every week, we've picked a different section of Jesus's red letters to talk about, to wrestle with, to apply to our lives and our leadership and all the things. And so we kind of took a break for the last 2 weeks and spent a couple of weeks celebrating TCG's 5th birthday. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for last week. That was incredibly humbling. For those of you that were a part of the birthday celebration and my official ordination, Holly did an amazing job planning that and many surprises, and I cried way more than I've cried since the last Olympics, probably. So for those of you that don't know me very well, Bob is the emotional one in our marriage, and so we watch like sad movies, like The Notebook made everybody cry. I didn't cry, but Bob cried, and that's great. But I cry at sporting events, and he laughs at me. And so, like, I watched the Kelsey documentary on Amazon. If you haven't seen it, so good. But I am like bawling during the Kelsey documentary, and he's like, "You're so weird." So, thanks for making me cry like it was the Super Bowl, Holly, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So, anyway. All right, so we've kind of been hanging out in the Sermon on the Mount for the last few weeks, which is Jesus's first sermon, so we're kind of doing this thing all backwards a little bit. But I wanted to end this year looking at the Sermon on the Mount and some of these words and teachings that Jesus was imparting like right out of the gate. And this is kind of the foundational way that he laid his ministry on earth. And so we're going to talk tonight about Matthew 6 verses 1 through 4. And I'm going to call this not for show. And here's what I mean by it. I'm going to read you these first 4 verses and we're going to talk about it. So it says this in the New Living Translation. It says, "Watch out. Don't do your good deeds publicly to be admired by others, for you will lose your reward from your Father in heaven. When you give to someone in need, don't do as the hypocrites do, blowing trumpets in the synagogues and streets to call attention to their acts of charity. I tell you the truth, if you have received they have received all the reward that they will ever get. But when you give to someone in need, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Give your gifts in private, and your Father who sees everything will reward you." Ouch. I think that's a bit of a condemnation for our current Christian culture. I don't know if you guys would agree with that or not, but I feel like in general, we as the church, big church, the collective church, we're pretty good at patting ourselves on the back about the good things that we do. Right? We're pretty good about making social media posts about the good things that we do. We're pretty good about making promotional videos about the good things that we do. And so when this first sentence says, "Don't do your good deeds publicly to be admired by others, for you will lose your reward," I think one of the things that I want us to kind of wrestle with here a little bit is this means we don't organize for the means of intention. Right? I think that there are a lot of times that we see needs around us and we think, wow, we can really gain some traction if we meet that need in a way that draws a lot of attention to it. So we have a lot of churches in this community, right? We get nicknamed the buckle on the Bible belt a lot. So no shortage of faith communities in this city. We've got some that are really engaged in doing great work all year round. And then we have others that do maybe 1 or 2 things a year. And those 1 or 2 things a year become these huge PR stunts. So I'm not naming names, but I know of churches that I have experienced who their one big act of service is to go paint an empty school building once a year when there are no families, no children, no teachers in the building, but that's what we're doing, right? And that becomes a pretty large media conglomerate. We've got a church that we know of that likes to go around and tie scarves on fence posts and on street signs and to leave gloves tucked into little cubbies on the public street. And that becomes a huge social media push that gets done. But there's not any relationship in tying a scarf onto a fence, right? If you don't engage with the person who gets to benefit from that, I think that there's a little bit of a disconnect in that space. I think that this is true of churches, of organizations, and it's true of us as individuals sometimes, right? Like, we've got to check our motives, is what Jesus is saying, before you go and do something. Are you meeting that need so that it looks good, it makes you feel good, or are you meeting the need because the need exists and somebody needs to fill that gap? And Jesus is saying it's about the need, it's about the recipient, it's not about you as the giver. But unfortunately, in our culture, we tend to be pretty giver-centric, right? Like, I'm gonna get involved in that, I'm gonna give to that, I'm gonna do something if I feel good, or I get recognition, or I get something out of it, right? Like, I think about the PBS pledge drive every year, right? A lot of times, I'll see some of those things kind of like go by, and it's like, yeah, that's nice, and I like PBS, but then it's like, oh, you can get this coffee mug if you give $25 to the work, and like that motivates us to do something, right? Like, what's in it for me? What's the return on investment for me? Am I getting something? Am I feeling good? Do I get social media likes? Do I get to increase my clout? So here's something that I jotted down this week, kind of as I was just wrestling and processing, because I'm gonna be honest, this passage, these 4 verses, these are a bit of a trigger for me, because we see this every single day, right? Like, this is something I see done wrong in the name of Jesus from coast to coast, not just here in Springfield, but like, I watch as churches and organizations and individuals and pastors just break their arm to pat themselves on the back for the things that they're doing. And it frustrates me and it angers me in a lot of ways. And so I was kind of jotting some notes down just as I processed things that I've seen and experienced. And so here's one of the things I wrote down early this week. When we see people or struggles as opportunities for publicity, we strip them of their peoplehood and their humanity. Because it's not a person, right? It's not a story. It's not a relationship that we're building when we come at it just from this angle of, ooh, let me get a selfie. Let me post that on Instagram. Let me see how many likes I can get. Let me make a video about this. Let me show you how good I am. In that space, when we're centering everything on the activity of filling the gap, we are stripping people of their humanity and their individuality and their story and all the things that have led to that moment and to that encounter. And I think that that is the absolute opposite of what Jesus calls us to do, right? Everything that Jesus did was relational, right? He invited people to tables. He invited people to come walk with him and journey with him and do life with him and ministry with him. Everything for Jesus was the building up of community and the investing in people. And I can't imagine, right, that Jesus is going to look and smile and say, oh, wow, I'm so glad that you got 2 million likes on that one thing. I think that there's this piece of Jesus's heart that says, but did you know their name? Did you listen to their story? Did you do anything to help further that situation or break a barrier or provide a word of encouragement? Or was it simply just this transaction? Because ministry is not transactional, right? Ministry is relational at its core, and ministry is messy, and ministry is hard, and ministry is time-consuming. Building relationships and community, it's not always convenient, right? But it wasn't designed to be convenient. If somebody calls in the middle of the night, right? You got 2 choices in that moment. Am I gonna keep sleeping? Or am I gonna answer to find out if people need something, if everything's okay? And I think relationship and ministry is all about being willing to be inconvenienced so that we can meet the needs of people around us. The other thought that I was processing is this. I think that we use people in a way that is just incredibly traumatic. And I think we see this happen in a lot of different ways. I think we see it happen when we use somebody as a photo op. I think we see it happen when organizations who may mean really well use somebody for a testimony video. That's one that I struggle with a lot. And that happens a lot, especially in the nonprofit world, right? If I can take this person and they can be my success story, they can be our poster child, right? And if we can get them on video and this wonderful emotional music behind them and this lighting, and we can show this to a room full of people with deep pockets, we're tokenizing people in those spaces, and we're using them in those spaces in a way that, again, tries to return on that investment. And so I struggle a lot with that, and I struggle a lot with the culture that we've built around that kind of giving. And I think that when we talk about these red letters, what we're trying to do every week, right, is strip away what's popular, strip away what's the norm now, and get back to the heart of what Jesus was asking us to do, what he was instructing people to do, right? He's speaking these words on the side of a hill with people who had no idea about technology, right? There wasn't anything to post or get attention or grab headlines for. But even in that culture, Jesus is saying, this isn't about you getting attention. This isn't about you feeling good about yourself. This isn't about you becoming more popular because of how generous you are. This is about you doing what's right because it's the right thing to do. So talk to me for a minute. How does this hit you in that first sentence? Where have you experienced this? Because we live in a culture where this kind of runs rampant. So talk to me a little bit about some experiences you've had. Mm-hmm.
At some level, we have to share what we're doing in order to raise funds, to get funding for the things that are important. There's a difference, however, between creating marketing video that is transactional versus sharing how we feel. But there is a tension there between
Mm-hmm. So how could that be done differently? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
I don't like to, put everything out there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, one of the things that we've always tried to do is not necessarily single out individual stories, but try to advocate for the whole collective of the need. And your nonprofit, our focus is different, and I recognize that. But I think being able to advocate for the level of need versus this compelling story that I feel like will motivate or manipulate people. Do you see what I'm saying? Because for me, I've always tried to look at it as your story is your story. And if you feel called to share your story, like I'll help elevate that for you if that's something you want to share. But I think we've got to be careful what that looks like. So, anybody else, experiences that you've seen where this passage kind of brings something up for you? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Versus look at what versus not what, but versus here is an advertiser and marketing to the rest of our community that says we've taken words are hard today.
That's fair.
Versus, the type of marketing or advertising that says, see, we are healthy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
More like, what's the focus of the story?
Mm-hmm.
Look at us,
Mm-hmm.
or this is how we can help. This is how there is success here.
Right.
This is the winnable fight.
Mm-hmm.
Motivation.
Right. Right. Uh-huh. It's hard. It's really hard. Rue, what were you going to say?
I feel like it involves a lot of ego checking. Because like as people, the ego is going to be there. Our desire to want to elevate ourselves is going to be there. And I think going into it, especially when it comes to like institutions, going into it maybe not to begin with, I think is key. Because there's a lot of, I feel like people go into that space not even acknowledging the fact that they're wanting to elevate themselves, and then they end up hurting people because there isn't that relationship and transparency.
This discussion and these red letters make me think of other red letters of Jesus, where Jesus talks about less of you, more of me, right? I think that that's kind of the heart that we do have to wrestle with, is like, how do I not reflect more of myself and elevate myself, but how do I reflect the call to be compassionate and merciful and loving and to battle injustice, because those are the things that Jesus calls us to. And I think there's that tension that exists in that. So.
Versus an update. Because there has to be an update
Right.
component. These are the organizations, keeping churches in check. These are the things we're doing. How we go about that is the sticky point. Because there's definitely a kind of place for that. But you know, put the sad music, trying to tug on the heartstring environment in there, that's manipulation. You're manipulating people to give you money, in essence. What you're trying to do.
The dog commercial, yeah. Christmas time, and I will remember you. See? Get something out of it.
And so,
Yeah.
I mean, we've done it before too, but this is the thing that we need to continue to do. Like, we're not doing it so that we can fund our pocket.
Right.
Like, so, again, it goes back to the motive. What's your motive behind it? Are we doing it to actually help people?
Right.
Or are we doing it so that we can give our staff better paychecks?
Right. Right. So, oh, go ahead, Paula.
And I mean, I think about how we have, oftentimes we've talked about, use this word, but it implies shame other communities and faith into stepping up and helping us build a there. And call it shame, call it manipulation, call it, encouraging them to grant and walking with Christ, however you want to.
I like to call it advocacy. It sounds a little bit more productive.
I mean, it's really, I guess I don't hear anything in the red letter word of Jesus that says that,
Yeah.
it's bad if I'm doing it so that everybody recognizes me on the street and says, oh my God, right? That's bad.
Right.
But it's encouraging.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. But I mean, I don't have any problem doing the right thing.
You're also parenting teenagers, so
Embarrassing
yeah.
them, or just encouraging them, or
Yeah.
telling them what they want to hear so they feel good about giving me the money that I need to pay somebody's rent, so that they're not stuck out on the street. It's ugly to say it out loud, but I feel really confident that Jesus is good with it. The way I do it.
Well, and I think that in that, Paula, I think that like, for me, right, it's not just about the end result, right? It's not just about getting someone to do what you want them to do. It's also, for me, when we're trying to advocate and share needs, it's also about like, you need to wrestle with something in you, right? Which again is what I think Jesus is saying here. See needs, meet needs, wrestle with that tension in yourself of being uncomfortable or it being hard or being inconvenient or whatever that is. But like, you've got to wrestle with that, because at the end of the day, I don't want you just to do something because we've told you to do it. I want you to do something because you sense that that's the right thing to do. And so I'm going to kind of build on what you said, Scott, because I think another thing we need to name in this, especially in its modern day manifestations of it, is there's also an element of competition. Right? There's an element of competition, because we live in a world that does have needs, but we live in a world where there is a very weird and twisted competition to meet those needs, right? Between nonprofits, between different churches, all these different things. Like, come here because we've got a cooler worship band. Come here, our fog machine and laser light is super cool. You know, come here and do all these things. We lose sight of this image that we are a community together, and that we should all be working together for the same goals and the benefit of our neighbors and the benefit of making the world a better place for everybody. So when Jesus says, he kind of shares this thought that we just talked about, not to do our good deeds publicly because you'll lose your reward. But then he said this. He said, when you give to someone in need, don't do as the hypocrites do, blowing your trumpets in the synagogues and the streets to call attention to their acts of charity. I tell you the truth, they have received all the reward that they will get. Hi, Homer. So hypocrite is a word that Jesus liked to use a lot. He used it multiple times in his ministry. He used it when he was talking about people in this behavior. He used it a lot when he was talking about religious leaders of the day. So if you go back to the original language and you pull out kind of that original Greek that Jesus was using, here's how that word actually gets translated. Very similar to ours, but I just like the way that it kind of works. It was actually equated to a performer wearing a mask. And so when Jesus says, you're like someone that's wearing a mask, you're not even being true to yourself, you're acting in that space, right? You're trying to bring attention to yourself and you're performing really in that space. And so Jesus uses this condemnation language of being a hypocrite multiple times. And here's why I think he uses it so often. And it's one of the places where he pushed back a lot. Because I think duplicitous behavior means a lot to Jesus's heart, right? Like, I think Jesus took that kind of behavior really seriously in his culture, and I think he still takes it seriously in our culture. When he sees people, and he experienced people when he was here, who would say one thing and do another thing, that made Jesus mad. Right? That was the kind of thing that made him flip over tables. That was the kind of thing that made him call an entire group of religious leaders a brood of vipers, because he does not have a lot of patience or tolerance, it seems like in Scripture, when we are kind of wearing these masks, when we say one thing but we do something different. Jesus is saying, don't try to pretend to be one thing. Just authentically be who you are and work on who you are, and be that consistently in all situations, with all people, in all places, no matter what you get out of it, right? No matter if you get anything back out of it. He wants you to claim to follow his ways and actually follow his ways, not just when you have an audience. Not just when we're posting on social media. That means we do the right thing because it's the right thing, even if nobody's watching, even if nobody's paying attention. We know what's happening, and that's where that conviction, that wrestling, I think, comes from. And then he says, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. I think that there's something that we all need to internalize, that recognizing that loving people doesn't ever seek credit, right? Doing the right thing isn't about increasing our clout. Having integrity isn't about becoming a bigger influencer, right? Doing the right thing, you do it because it's the right thing to do. You do good because it is needed, and you do good because it makes someone else's life better. And in doing good and making someone's life better, you are literally living out the incarnate of who Jesus was and what Jesus calls us all to do as his followers. So then he says, give your gifts in private, and your Father who sees everything will reward you. In other words, give, don't gloat. Like, don't worry about what people think about you. Just do what's right. And keep in mind that we're not performing for the thousands of people on social media. We're not performing for whoever's paying attention to what we're doing. We operate for an audience of one, right? We operate with this idea that the only person's opinion who really matters of me is God's. And what God calls me to do, I'm accountable to that with him. Whether that lines up with what's comfortable or what easy. Trust me when I tell you that when I went to Bob and said, I think I need to quit my job and I think I'm supposed to go into ministry, like, he responded to that well, but at the time, even if that audience was like, Christy, you're crazy, I still had to be accountable to that call. I still had to be accountable to the conviction that was on my heart that something different needed to be done. And the same is true for all of us. Even if it's not popular, even if it's not easy, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it doesn't have a return on investment, you're accountable to that unction. You're accountable to that tension that we all know and feel when the Holy Spirit's working on our heart, when we see a need and we just feel like, man, I should do something, but that may make me late for work, or that may make the people in my car uncomfortable, or I'm gonna have to explain to my boss this, or whatever that looks like. You are accountable to an audience of one. So this phrase that is in here, I think is one that modern day Christianity, when we talk about rewards, we've kind of taken and twisted a little bit. The rewards that are in heaven, the rewards that await us, we've kind of taken it and put a little bit of a capitalist spin on this, right? Like, oh, if you do good things, you're gonna have an amazing house and jewels and crowns and all the things in heaven. Listen, I don't really know what the rewards of heaven are. None of us really do. Scripture's not super specific about them. But I do know that we need to reframe our idea about a reward, right? Because I think we have a very human perspective of that award, or that word, award. We get this very earthly view of that. So I want you to think of things a little bit differently for the sake of this conversation. I don't want you to think about a reward as like a physical, tangible thing you're gonna get. Like you show up in heaven and God's like, oh, your trophy case is right over there. Or like, here's your goodie bag, whatever. I don't know what that's gonna look like. But I think that when we reframe rewards, we need to look at the rewards that are not tangible, right? The rewards of other people thriving. That's a reward. Like, to see other people succeeding and overcoming things, that's a beautiful reward to get to just experience that and watch that. Mandy, you got a thought? Yes. Yes. Yep. Yes.
Intrinsic value is watching a kid open presents on Christmas morning, because nothing about that was fun. It's all being neat, right? Nothing about that was fun at all. But the joy she gets watching her baby open her presents.
Yeah.
That's
Absolutely. Absolutely. So like, I look around this room and to me, y'all are rewards. Like watching you grow, watching relationships grow, watching people count days and months and weeks of sobriety, watching people chase new dreams and have the courage to leave jobs and start crazy new adventures and whatever those things look like. To me, those are the rewards of relationship. Those are the rewards of community. Those are the rewards of answering the phone at midnight or being out in the freezing cold and checking on people. Those are the rewards of watching people grow. I want you to think about rewards like the thriving of individuals, but I also want you to think about rewards as the health and the betterment of our communities, right? Like when the community gets better, everybody benefits in some way, shape, or form, right? And so I say this all the time, but I'm a huge believer that we define success in this country and in this community totally backwards, right? We define success a lot of times when we're talking about Springfield and when our mayor, who gives the State of the City address, no disrespect to Mayor McClure, but we usually use those opportunities to talk about tourism and to talk about, visitation to the city, or we talk about business capital and new adventures and all of these kind of things that are happening. What would it look like if we didn't define success by dollars and by these huge things, but what if we define success by the quality of life of the person who lives on the street and who is the most outcast member of our society? People
don't really contribute.
Well, yes.
It's like, what do you mean? They've worked before, they have a social security card, they paid in.
Right.
Maybe they're not at the moment.
So what does it look like for us to help individuals thrive by overcoming those barriers, right? So that they help to make our community a better place to live, a better place for them to thrive too. That to me is reframing rewards. So when Jesus says that your rewards are in heaven, when your rewards are eternal, y'all, making the community better, making people's lives better, those are eternal rewards too. Because I don't always get to see the end of everybody's story. Sometimes I just get to intersect with a story for a chapter, and I'm so blessed to see that chapter of growth or whatever that looks like. But whatever direction that goes, whatever journey that those individuals take, there is eternal consequence to those that I don't always get to see. And so when Jesus says your rewards await you in heaven, I think a lot of that is relational. I think a lot of that is you get to see the impact and the difference that was made because you didn't worry about how many people were paying attention. You just did the right thing. Bottom line, the thing I want you to walk away from more than anything else is this. Faith is not for show. Faith is not for publicity. Faith is not for likes. Faith is for transformation. It is transformation of your heart, your mind, your willingness, your activity level, your relationships, your engagement in community. And as you transform yourself, other people are transformed by your example, by your courage, by your bravery, by your love, by your compassion. And so when we transform ourselves, inherently we contribute to the transformation of our community, to the transformation of our neighborhoods, to the transformation of our families, whether they necessarily want to be transformed or not, right? You inherently embed tension into those relationships that become a catalyst for growth. And I think that that is true when we invest into ourselves and we're willing to make that faith our own and take off the masks, take off the performance. It's not about doing the right things or saying the right things or keeping the holy checklist. It's about changing who we are, how we see people, and our willingness to make the world a better place for every single person. We don't get to judge whether they're worthy or not. We don't get to determine whether or not they make us comfortable or not. We get to love people because we're called to it. And we get to love people because it's the right thing to do. So I want you to take a few minutes, and I want you to just kind of talk at your tables or grab a couple of tables and talk in a group. And I'm going to give you two questions. So the first one I want you to wrestle with for a little bit is this. How does seeking publicity or trying to get credit for good things, how does that cause religious trauma for individuals that may encounter that? I want you to talk about it at your tables for a few minutes, and then we're going to talk about it as a bigger group. How does seeking publicity for good works cause religious trauma? The dividers?
Yeah.
Just to cover up the rest of the room, that's the rest of the worship center's got like pews and all that kind of stuff. So we just kind of walled it off to keep it a little bit more smaller and intimate. All right, so talk to me a little bit about what some of your thoughts are. I'm going to start with you guys back there. Chris. Hmm. 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 So, absolutely. And not only that, but when a faith community or a nonprofit, when we tokenize people in that way, right? I think the other thing that happens in that can cause a lot of religious trauma for people is it's almost like we're going to celebrate you for the progress you've made and how great you've done it. And we're going to place you kind of on this pedestal to be an example to others. But we're all human, right? And we all still have struggles and we all still make mistakes. So this pedestal then becomes kind of like a pressure cooker for a lot of people, right? Like suddenly people are looking to me and like, I can't fail. I can't do anything wrong, which creates what? Anxiety and fear and worry. And sometimes that added pressure, especially if people aren't in a place on their healing journey, that like they have the coping skills and the support system to handle that, it can lead to relapse. It can lead to a lot of other struggles. And so I think that's something, Chris, that's really important that you guys point out that we've got to be really aware of is we don't want to try to draw attention to be like, oh, look what we did and how we help someone in a way that sets them up to actually struggle more, right? That doesn't glorify Jesus in any way, shape, or form. So how about you guys back here? What did you talk about? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
toothbrushes, and so they put out this try and duplicate of 10,000 toothbrushes. We don't need that. That's not what we, nobody's hearing us, nobody's actually seeing us, and again, that value is the individual person.
Yeah. Yeah. Not only make you feel guilty, but there's a shame element in that, right? Like, I've talked to people who are like, we went out and handed out toothbrushes and people didn't appreciate it. And I'm like,
I could never give one away.
I'm like, but did you ask them if they needed a toothbrush? Well, no, everybody needs a toothbrush. I'm like, well, maybe they already had a toothbrush. But there's like a judgment level, right, on the degree of appreciation that is shown that I think is also really important in that space.
They don't take into consideration even what happened to that person today.
Right.
You know, maybe you just did something they need, but you don't know what happened. People, wow, I think they're not. They look down and well, they weren't appreciative of what I did for them. We have no idea what that person was doing.
Right.
Or they got you to give them the person toothbrush.
Right.
But
Right. Well, and I also think that there's something to be said, again, you know, Jesus's heart was relationship. Jesus's heart was community. So in the context of relationship and in the context of community, you start to get to know, well, they probably don't need 5 more toothbrushes, right? But here's what they probably could use. And so, like, again, it goes back to that competition piece that I also think we have to kind of keep weaving back into that. For example, I noticed that several different faith organizations last night went out and handed out blankets. It was cold, right? There's nothing wrong with giving out blankets, okay? Hear my heart. But here's what I'm saying. We know we didn't give out blankets this week. We gave out hot hands and socks and emergency foil blankets that are disposable. Why? Because tomorrow it's going to be back up into the 60s and the 70s, and people don't want to carry blankets around just yet. So the hundreds of blankets that just went out on the streets last night from well-meaning organizations, I'm not disclaiming that, are probably going to be discarded, right? They're going to become disposable because we don't want to carry them around. But again, when we all learn to work together and it's not about who gets the credit, we recognize that we could do a blanket drive and we're going to drop that off, and at the right time, those are going to go out in the right way, so that we kind of we magnify the impact when we all learn how to work together. And let's be really honest, that's just not something that a lot of faith communities are good at doing. We don't all work together well because we feel like we're inherently competing with each other. And to me, that's the complete opposite of what Jesus is telling us, right?
I've sat this close to this chair with somebody at the senior citizens center talking about co-worker shelters and housing, and they tell me right in my face that people don't want housing. And I said, how do you know that? Well, what are you basing that off of? I said, yeah, I find it to be true for a lot of businesses, but on the nights where it's minus 12, might want to have a little shelter.
Right, right.
You know, I mean, if you're gonna get yourself thrown in jail and get off the street, that may be the extreme. There again, costing us
Right.
more money than addressing the problem. So.
And I would argue that that kind of conversation, Jack, is also another thing we see that keeps people from walking out these red letters, right? Oh, I'm not going to go and help people because people don't want to be helped. Or I'm not going to go and help people because they won't help themselves. Like, we impose a narrative that is man-made to fill in the gaps of what Jesus calls us to do. Like, we manufacture reasons to justify that we don't have to follow these letters because someone's not worthy of it, or because someone doesn't deserve it, or someone doesn't want it. Jesus says, see a need, meet a need, do the right thing. And I think we have, as people in general, we're really good at trying to impose a narrative that doesn't always exist. What'd you guys talk about?
Elevating themselves on social media. When people go out and serve. And Jack was also saying, like, the one time I'm going to volunteer at Christmas, and I'm going to post it on Facebook, and we're going to have a whole thing. And how that, like, similar to what Mandy was saying, how that puts people, like, treats them as an object instead of a person. It's like, I'm going to get my emotional ego needs that through you. And then I also think that like I was processing like how when people come into a space with that posture of like I'm gonna elevate myself here, this is gonna make me feel good, how that inherently like can start disconnection from the people in that space who actually may have something that you can learn from.
Yeah. So you bring up a good point. Let me double check something really quick, Rue. Okay. Don't do your good deeds in publicly when you give to someone. Okay. So it doesn't say anything about only once a year or only for the holidays. I was just triple checking that. But that becomes part of our Christian checklist, right? Like, oh, it's the holiday season. I have to do something charitable. Oh, it's cold. I need to serve once, right? Like, check, I did that thing. I'm good now until the next year. When in reality, Jesus is saying this as like a daily call as part of following him on a regular basis, right? Where do we find the needs regularly, not just once a year, once at a time?
I initiated stop Christmas gifts with my family because as people got older, I was like, this is just ridiculous. People
Yeah.
come out and credit card and buy them, they're going to be paying
Yeah.
for Christmas next year.
Yeah.
I did want to connect as my family got smaller. I wanted to volunteer to connect with people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the spirit of Christmas is not really,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have anything to do with what it's
That is very true. What about you guys? What did you talk about?
Well, I was moving around, I didn't have anybody.
Okay.
Something that in my experience, and I see this at work all the time, is we have, I'm working with people who are very hesitant to access resources that they need because they already
Mm-hmm.
and they are resources that are somehow connected to a faith-based
Mm-hmm.
including the connection journal. When I come to consulting,
Mm-hmm.
I make sure to say, just so you know,
Mm-hmm.
there's no proselytizing.
Right.
You're there, you don't have to go through service before you get help.
Mm-hmm.
And when we have these big PRs by churches that are, we are going to, as a group, under the glory of God, spread God's love and message by passing out.
Mm-hmm.
It really does. I didn't believe it until I saw it. It will cause people to go hungry
Mm-hmm.
or to be put out of their home.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than put themselves back in that maybe if we weren't
Yeah.
community so big on putting church name first and then
Right.
everything they did,
Right.
people would be more comfortable accessing these communities.
Mm-hmm. 100%. Do you have something to add, Bob?
Bounce around a lot. Can't get all the interesting. Well, just the idea, most people don't want 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
People don't realize that 5 minutes for a hug is way more than anything.
Yeah.
We talk to people on Facebook, like women, take 5 minutes to talk to somebody. What the story is. You don't know how that affects people, right? And so many churches don't want to spend that time. Like a toothbrush or the blanket or the hot hand, bottle of water, their easy way out, right? I did my need.
Right.
You know what? Freaking listen for a couple of minutes, talk to somebody, get to know them. You don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
You don't know what they're thinking. You don't know what the next thought is, or the next action is. How you can change someone's world and stop, spend 2 minutes talking to somebody at that time.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Instead of handing them a bottle of water and walking away, at least say hi. At least I can help you. You know what? And sometimes our friends feel circumstances don't necessarily have the best way. Don't be afraid to get somebody a Christmas card.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. Hi, Jeff and Sammy.
I found some time for me that he was someone who just listeners share a smile and kind work, not a daily toothbrush. People forget the value of simply listening to others. He says, I've learned TCG, I didn't always know what my meaning really truly was until after I shared my thoughts and discussions were had.
And yes. And I think sometimes meeting the need for people isn't always a physical need, right? Like it isn't always giving something. It isn't always money. It isn't always, sometimes it's just being present. Sometimes our willingness to listen and our willingness to just sit in that space for an extra 5 minutes while someone processes their day, that's loving. That's meeting a need. That's filling the gap. That's answering the calls of red letters in a big, big way. So what'd you guys talk about over here?
So I think that the challenge is when churches use your pain to draw people into their need. So it dehumanizes you and not taking into account that you're not willing or ready or able to share your pain. Nor do they even come to you, help you in your pain, but they want to use your pain to bring other people in. Like, look, this person, they're coming and they're doing this and they're going through this hard time. You can come join us in their pain. So you have to do it.
Absolutely.
Like I have in my story that my own personal story, connect with other people, sometimes I have to be careful because I don't want to tell their story while I'm telling it.
Right. Yeah. Respecting people's autonomy is huge and really important.
But it dehumanizes the others when we just use them for their story.
Yeah.
Like you said earlier, it kind of takes the money out because we're not really caring for their needs, we're just using them for their story.
Yeah. So let me share a couple of things. I'm going to give you one last discussion question, and we're going to call it a night tonight and give you some time to wrestle with this over the week. So I think that there's something really practical in what you just named, and several of you named this. I believe strongly that following Jesus means that we advocate for those in need, that we are vessels of justice in this world, and we're trying to work to make this world a better place, right? So I think that part of our faith being lived out is learning how to advocate. But learning how to advocate without tokenizing and without causing religious trauma or taking credit, like you have to learn how to do that. And that's not something we do well in our culture. And so some of the ways that we've tried to teach that, and some of the ways I want to encourage you to kind of wrestle with, right? So I just finished recording street outreach training videos for this upcoming season. And I said on one particular video multiple times, right? Do not take pictures of people. Do not take pictures of people. Do not take pictures of people's campsites. Do not take pictures of people's sleeping spots that give away privacy or anything like that. You are welcome to share your experience of being on outreach, how that felt, what you saw, what you observed, what you heard. But that doesn't mean you name names. That doesn't mean you tell someone's story. You can tell your story. You can tell how that made you uncomfortable, what it brought up in you. You can talk about that and do it in a way. If you want to share a picture of footsteps in the snow or ice that's frozen on your rearview mirror, right? Or the back of the van that's full of outreach supplies. Not in a way that says, look at what we're doing tonight, we gave all this away, but in a way that says, can you imagine that this is the only things that are keeping you warm and comfortable tonight? And challenging people to wrestle with their privilege, right? Not in a shameful way, but in a way that says, I want you to think about the privilege that you have. Like you're sitting probably in a comfy chair under a roof, probably with your heat on, probably with a blanket over you that is dry. And I just want you to take 5 minutes to listen to my experience tonight and how many blankets I gave out on a night that was wet and cold. And like, I'm struggling to sit in my warm house tonight while I type this. Do you see the difference between that and saying, here's another toothbrush, and let me tell you how I went out tonight and gave out 500 toothbrushes and told people about Jesus, right? Two totally different approaches, but I think it's really important that we wrestle with a very practical application of how we walk this out. Bob? That was also on our training video. Don't do that. No, I think a lot of times when people give out toothbrushes, it usually comes with tracts. And that's not necessarily needed, right? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. So we always look at street outreach, and I always train everybody that, like, if you're coming on outreach to witness, to give people Bibles, to give them a tract, or to pray with them, this is the wrong team. We're going out to build relationships with people. And through the course of relationships, if people ask you for a Bible or they ask you to pray with them, 1,000%, sure, absolutely. But I'm not going to suppose that that's all that you need, because I've got news for you. Jesus is great and faith is important, and I believe that with all of my heart, but giving somebody a Bible is not going to keep them warm at night, right? Giving somebody a tract, unless they burn it, isn't going to keep somebody warm or fed in a city where we have incredible injustice.
The gathering tree, I didn't understand it when I was first going there a good ago when they were downtown, but they didn't want you to serve food, you have to do it off the property. And they wanted you to come and play board games, which I was done. But I was like, I'm working with church pizza,
Right.
in mobile, so
Right.
that's why they exist,
Mm-hmm.
I never could really get.
Yeah. And those relationships.
And I did take pictures of the backs of people with the trailer, but I wanted people to realize there is people here that are hungry and they're not there every night. I'm just the night I go there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to challenge you to do some self-evaluation, okay? We are going into what I like to call the charitable season, right? We're going into mid-October to the end of December. Tends to be that time of the year when the temperatures drop and, people kind of feel like they need to do more to help people that are struggling in our community. And I'm glad that people help. I'm not saying don't help. I'm just saying we need to wrestle with how we help. We need to wrestle with why we help, and we need to wrestle with not getting the credit for helping. And so I just want to challenge you to think about some of those practical things this week and kind of evaluate, what are some ways that we can make some changes individually and collectively so that we're better following the integrity of what Jesus called us to do. So I want you to talk about that for a few minutes at your table as we kind of close out. If there's tangible things that you can see, like, oh man, this is making me think of this, or this makes me think about this one thing that I've done, or maybe I should do this differently. Kind of process that a little bit with each other, and then we're going to call it a night. So thank you guys for coming to hang out. I hope you enjoyed this new space. I think it's going to work well. So we'll be back next week. I won't be here next week, so Holly's going to preach. Next week, Bob and I are going to be in Portland. So we'll be finishing up softball games for Montana about this time. So we'll miss you guys, and we'll be thinking of you. And if you need anything this week, get a hold of Rue. So Rue will be your go-to person. So, all right. Don't need anything. All right. Feel free to hang out, talk at your tables for a little while, grab some more coffee. Oh, okay, fine. So we're only in Portland for one day.
What day, where else are you going?
So let me show you what I did. So we fly into Portland Wednesday at 10:30 a.m. and We were gonna stay downtown, but I decided I didn't want to do that. And so I found this little Airbnb north of the airport out in the woods. And we're staying in a camper.
Oh, cool.
That has like a fire pit
That's
and
cute.
an outdoor bathtub. I don't know how I feel about that, but
That's very Portland.
yeah. So I was like, we're gonna be like outside,
Where is it? North?
Northwest Crescent Road.
Because I grew up in Northeast Portland.
Okay, so this is like the Portland.
That's near Portland State University.
Yes. Yeah, it's up north of that. So yeah. So we're gonna stay there Wednesday night, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. So I think we're just gonna find like a grocery store and grab some stuff and go relax. And then Thursday morning,